life living and making a living can sometimes wear us out, grind us down, and dull our senses. So for a keen mind and a sharp contributive edge that can make it all easier and better and more productive, let's take some time to sharpen our axe. Stay with us right now for Life Talk.
Hello, I'm Gina Fitt, and you've either surfed to or purposely selected Life Talk with Bern Moses. Welcome to another in our series of ongoing verbal essays brought to you in this television format. It's a pleasure to have you with us today. Bern, last week we were talking about how people tend to get trapped in lives that are limiting and repetitious, and they don't allow them the freedom to grow. And we were talking about how we have to be conscious in the matter of determining the course or the direction of our own lives. And that we do have a choice, which is something we often don't feel like we have. I have no control over where I am. I have no control over where I'm going. I have to do these things whether I want to or not. And towards the end of the show, you talked about the fact that sometimes if we step out, take initiative, make some conscious decisions, evaluate where we want to be, what we're going to do to get there, that we get help in the form of serendipity. And maybe you could elaborate on that a little bit.
Whenever we get to talking about things like this, I know the feeling that might come up, like, oh, all right, well and good, however, where do I start? How do I get it done? Especially when we're told that if it's going to be, it's up to me. And I've heard that many, many times, and I understand what they're saying, but I think that's an incomplete thought. In other words, if indeed a person says, well, it's up to me, I know, that I don't have the information that I need. I know that something is missing, and therefore I better stay where I am. Because if indeed that's true, I'm through before I start. And I really know that it happens to a lot of people. The way I like to put it is that if it's going to be, it's up to me, and synergy, and serendipity, because that's really what has to occur. In other words, for example, synergy, when you complement who you are synergistically with someone else. In other words, if you want to do something, find someone who's doing it well and synergize. In other words, connect, okay? Form a team, if you would, where this person will mentor you, coach you, guide you, and you in turn can provide some flame, some heat even to their efforts, okay? In other words, synergy is when two people come together towards some common purpose and accomplish more, much more, than either one of them could individually.
In other words, 2 + 2 isn't 4
exactly.
when you're building and creating together.
That's right. And it's a law of physics, but it's just as applicable in the socioeconomic environment. Now, in the physical environment, synergy essentially says when you combine two elements together toward a common purpose, the sum is greater, that the total is greater than the sum of its parts, which is kind of fascinating when you think about it. In other words, if we have a rope that's been woven and tested to hold 2,000 pounds, and another rope that's been woven and tested for 1,000 pounds, logically, if we weave them together, that new rope will hold 3,000 pounds. But that's not so. In other words, once those ropes are combined, they will probably hold 5,000 pounds, and that extra 2,000 pounds is synergy. It's kind of like, and the same thing is true with people. If they get on a common purpose, and each one is supporting the other, and they join their efforts, they can accomplish a great deal.
Yeah.
And so if they're saying if it's up to me, that's a lonely journey. If in synergy, you might draw in 1 or 2 or 3 people in your quest and be able to provide support, for one another, and even some coaching. Because sometimes if we're objective, we're standing outside. It's kind of like today I was at a sales meeting. We conducted a little, what I call a PDS, Personal, Professional, and Production Development meeting for our staff. And there was 2 essentially brand new people there, okay? One had been watching the other perform. They were out working together. And they had kind of done handovers. Each of them had done a little bit, and both of them were giving each other some pretty capable coaching even though they themselves independently were insecure and uncertain of their own effort. They could see in that other person because they were objective about it, and they were able to support one another. So here's you got the blind leading the blind. And benefiting.
Doing it effectively.
Yeah, and benefiting.
That's an interesting thought.
Yeah, if into the mix you can throw someone with expertise, some experience and know-how, my gosh, what can happen?
Well, I think it's important that we remember we don't live in a vacuum.
Exactly.
And we can't create something new out of the same old existing ideas and information.
Right.
We
Now,
have
some
to
of that
stir the
synergy, by
pot
the
a little
way,
bit.
some of the synergy can come from a book, a cassette tape, or a video. But there's no question that if you can align yourself with like-minded people with a common purpose and really focus on one another's attention, not compete, but cooperate towards some worthwhile intention, then you're way ahead. And so, if it's going to be, it's up to me and synergy. In other words, I've got to combine my efforts with other people, assist them, let them assist me, be open to coaching. And coaching, let's stop there for a second. Coaching, so little of it is going on in the business community, in the sales world, in life in general. I mean, coaching. Some training going on. You know, they'll train people, but then they typically will turn us loose and have us perform. Okay, and then say, well, if you'd have did that, you'd have made the sale. If you hadn't done this, and you need to do that, you know what I mean? It's sort of like the convincing that goes on rather than real coaching. Coaching is where someone really involves themselves time and energy-wise in what you're doing, and from an objective view is constantly making suggestions. It's kind of like Steve Young and Troy Aikman. I mean, these people have coaches that watch them all the time in practice and on the game. I mean, they're not just part of a team. These people have a special role to play, and they have someone watching them all the time. Someone who may never have played the game, but who understand what's supposed to be done and can watch with a discerning eye and say, you forgot to do this, you added this to that particular movement, and you shouldn't have. You know, I mean, that was just called coaching, hands-on. The only place it occurs, and where excellence seems to really be evidenced, is in sports and in the theater. Because you have a lot of coaching going on in the theater. Like a director, for example, will have an actor go through a scene and they'll say, no, here's the way I want you to do it. Say it this way, walk this way, stop here, turn there. Okay, do it again. No, turn this way. Okay, you got that piece. And pretty soon they say, okay, that's the way I want it. You got it, do it again. All right, now do it that way all the time. And when they don't, they catch them right away. You know, very little of that's going on in the sales industry, where people are really, really coached, or in life. You know, in dating. I know I've done some dating coaching in the past, and I mean, if you can really coach someone, say, okay, now here's what you do, and you watch them, you know, in their action. I mean, you can create a monster. Well, a good monster, cookie monster.
Sometimes, you know, we go to our friends and we share with them things that are going on in our lives, and I think maybe more often than not, we're looking for validation of our own thoughts or feelings or actions, rather than really good, sensible advice or counsel or maybe opinion would be a better word. But I think that if we were to look at people who have truly been successful, they are almost always going to say, I owe this too. And there will be acknowledgments of other people behind the scenes that we never hear about unless we happen to read the credits in the book or whatever, who made valuable contributions in the way of adding information or saying, well, you know, you're really off track here, you need to change directions, or did you look at this? Did you try that? Have you thought about going with this idea? And so what we see is a finished product and someone who's receiving all the glory and accolades.
It's wow.
And it's like, wow, how did look at this one-man band, and we don't realize that they really did avail themselves of all the resources they could pull from. And sometimes maybe that takes some hard work, because people aren't always going to be willing to drop everything they have going in their lives just to be your mentor. You have to prove to them or give them a reason why they want to do that, why they want to spend that time with you.
And you know, there's a lot of frustrated mentors out here too who really would like to assist, but they can't find anybody who will make a commitment, who will really follow through and do what they suggest. Oh yeah.
They'll coach and counsel and guide, and the people will give up and suck their thumb and say, I can't do this, and quit.
That's true. I think there's another thing too. This idea of eliciting support, responding to it, reciprocating to it. Then the other thing is the serendipity factor, that once you're on purpose, and once you're being coached in how to do this reasonably well, and you're performing it, there is always extra rewards that seem to flow or to reveal themselves to us. Serendipity is not a magical thing, beyond the fact that our mind and our perception is magical in how it can take in information when it's focused. Serendipity, there's a marvelous book on the Princes of Serendip written by a man named Bach that I would recommend to anybody, but it gives all kinds of examples of serendipity and how it comes into our life, sometimes seemingly by pure chance. You know, you're on a plane and you happen to meet someone and you hit it off, and it turns up that they're in a certain kind of business and they give you a suggestion, and I mean your whole world changes because of that one moment, you know, that element of chance. But the thing of it is, if you hadn't been on the plane, if you hadn't been on purpose, if you hadn't had a conversation, then it wouldn't have occurred. So you are involved in that. It's not just pure luck.
I think one
It's
thing you
pluck.
said there was really important. You're on purpose. If you were not on your purpose, you might have been on the plane, you might have chose to stick your nose in a book and
Right.
not strike up a conversation,
You get it.
not be willing to get a little bit out of what's comfortable and make that effort to connect with another human being in a way that you're giving value.
You see, success may be, it's never a promise, but success, fulfillment, happiness may be the happy consequence of being on purpose and being synergistic with someone. You know what I mean? That may be the happy consequence. And usually would be if you prevail, persist, continue. Serendipity is something else. It's kind of like my best illustration that I recall doing with it is that if a young boy lives near a park and goes to his daddy, and he'd say he's 12 years old, and he's heard about conservation and, you know, keeping the planet clean and what have you. So he notices all this junk and, you know, bags and bottle tops and cigarette butts in the park. So he goes to his dad one day and he says, "Daddy, can I go across and really, you know, get some garbage bags and really police, if you would, clean up the park?" And his dad's real proud of him. He says, "Well, that's a great idea." And he says, "For even thinking about it, when you get through, we'll separate the bottles and the cans, and I'll take you down to the recycling center and you can get some money for your effort." Say, well, that's a happy consequence of being on purpose. You know what I mean? That wasn't his intention, but it's a happy consequence. Serendipity is where, as he's cleaning up the park, he's more focused than he ever has been. As he's dedicated to the, you know, the snap tops and, you know, little items that otherwise would be overlooked. And so he's really focusing very carefully, and so he finds a diamond ring. See, I mean, there's where the real reward is, because the diamond was always there. People have been walking past it and playing over it and what have you, and probably he had too, but he wasn't focused, wasn't on purpose. See what I mean? And that's serendipity. And I have so many incidents in my life where that occurred, where I have to believe in the fact that it's there. Now, like I say, it's not magical. It's just a valid expectation that can generate if you're on purpose and you're synergistic with other people who are of like mind. On a lonely journey, you may not do that. You know, there has to be someone else perhaps that is stimulating you and keeping you focused, because otherwise you may not continue. But it's terribly important. I know one time here, not too long ago, in one of the shows, and again, we will again, talking about task mastering. You know, you've heard of Toastmasters, you know, where people go and learn how to speak because they're being coached by people who aren't good speakers, but they know what they want to hear. You know what I mean? Actually, a blind leading the blind again, and everybody benefits. Task mastering is much the same thing. In other words, it's people coming together who are of like mind, and that is to succeed, to move forward, to make adjustments, to get better at whatever it is they're doing. And an environment where no one can benefit off the other's success, so that their input can be unprejudiced, valid, you know what I mean, sincere, and then have them make commitments to one another and go and complete those commitments and come back and celebrate. And when they didn't complete the commitment, to commiserate. And that's what people say, why didn't you do it? Are you serious? You know, you said you were going to. What was your intention? Do you want to recommit to that, or you want to change it? I mean, someone to hold our feet to the fire, because the subconscious mind doesn't make a very good boss. It allows us to get away with anything.
It gives new meaning to the word everyone's a critic, or to the phrase everyone's a critic. Maybe they are, and maybe there's a reason why they are, because although we can't all perform at a certain level, we certainly don't seem to be too far off the mark when we're saying, well, you know, that's the best one of the lot. We can always pick out the best horse or the best movie or the best performer. We can't be those things, but we can
Oh, that's
see
something
it.
I think that's important too. I think a lot of the listeners have to recognize that it may not even be appropriate to try to compete or to match the gifted ones. I'm convinced that there are certain people out here who in specific fields are gifted. Now, we don't know why that occurs, you know what I mean, but they're gifted. They're an
just
extreme
came that
talent.
way.
Yeah. I remember, for some reason, it pops up into my mind in high school. We had an athlete that played on our team. It was almost aggravating. You know, he never worked out as hard as the rest, never took it as serious as the rest of us, and he was better than any of us. You know, he was just gifted. And not too long ago, after nearly a half a century, the community, the town, looked back on as one of the great athletes of our school's history. And he was put in a Hall of Fame that they have in that community, which was kind of a nice honor. And all of us, you know, applauded that, you know, because he was indeed a gifted athlete who could have gone on to greater things, but he just didn't care. And that's kind of aggravating too. He could have probably
The
been
most aggravating part,
Yeah.
probably, for those who are working so hard.
Exactly. And so you can't really compete against the gifted ones always and come up, you know, ahead. But you can always get better and get really close to the very best through application and what have you, given the time. I do think there's another issue here, that what we're really talking about is something kind of scary and spooky, and that's change. You know what I mean? Change is a serious, dangerous word in the hearts and minds of a lot of people. So you're going to have to make a change. And on the surface, consciously, that's okay. You know what I mean? People know that in order to be different, I'm going to have to make changes. And yet something else gets in there, and it really shuts us down if we're not careful. And it's because change, see, we have to deal with our subconscious mind, who wants everything to kind of stay the way it is. And that's a survival mechanism. And I don't think we've ever discussed this on the show. Let's define change for a second. Change is ceasing to be who I am in order to be somebody else, really. Or change is things ceasing to be the way they are so that they can be some other way. I mean, I think those are good basic definitions of change. And we may want that. We may want that. But the subconscious mind hears ceasing to be. Remember how that kept coming up? Ceasing to be. And it goes, ceasing to be, no way. Because that's survival, okay? And it'll send out its rats and roaches all over us and deter us from otherwise sound and good and worthwhile ideas. And so to eliminate the word change and confine it to the silver that you might carry in your pocket, I mean, I think of that as change. I don't think of life's changes. I've conditioned myself not to do that, but rather to think in terms of a choice that I have to adjust or to adapt. Remember those two things?
Yes.
An adjustment would be a predetermined, conscious, purposeful choice to do something better and different, okay? Realizing that it has to be just a little adjustment. It doesn't have to be a great big one, because a little adjustment, practiced and accumulated over a period of time, creates a substantial difference in who you're becoming.
Well, Bert, so often we're told, well, the grass is not greener on the other side of the fence. Well, different is not always better. You should be grateful to have what you have. You should be grateful to be where you are. And so I think a lot of times people sense, because that's drilled into us, that change is worse. You're going to end up worse off than you are now. At least now I know what I have.
Now, don't rock the boat?
Don't rock the boat, because we're all going to fall out and get wet, and we'll, you know, go slogging home wet. Or I think sometimes it also, especially if we're trying to, quote, change our partner or our coworkers or people that we associate with, that implies to them that, well, you're not good enough the way you are.
Oh, well, yeah. If you try to change somebody else, you're in trouble before you start.
Or even if you try to change the way things are done, and you have to get their cooperation and support in order to enact those changes, that implies to people that it's not good enough. And we always say, well, you're just going to have to like me the way I am. I should be good enough for you.
Oh, my, really?
I think people tend to have that attitude.
Yeah. Oh, I think that's been conditioned into us, and that's what this show's been about, is to take a look at that and provide tools to make it different somehow. See, in other words, if you just got the rules and arbitrary posturings and what have you, it's tough. But if you've got some tools to use to start, applying to these things, that can make it pretty easy.
Where do we get the belief that change can actually be better? How do we start to become aware of that inside of us, that change could be a good thing, that we have hope, that we have the belief that if we go through this process, that we struggle, that we fight, that we sacrifice, that we are uncomfortable, that we're going to come out better off instead of worse off? Even
if we don't, though. I remember saying to people many, many times, look, this effort that you're putting in, that we're asking you to do, may not be worth it. You know what I mean? The job may not be worth it. The result may not be worth it. Nothing may be worth it, but you are. Because every time that we're venturing out, testing ourselves, exploring and examining and giving it a shot, if you would, we're going to grow personally. There is no way that you cannot. To not do that is to diminish. You know what I mean? Either we're growing or we're diminishing. You know the old thing about once you stop ripening, you begin to rotten? It was the same thing. If a person tries to hold on to the status quo, things are going to get worse. That's called neglect.
Well, you know, Bern, I think that we even have our little myths about that if we change and grow, we're just going to be more dissatisfied with our circumstances. And so it'd be better to keep those blinders on so we're not so dissatisfied and uncomfortable.
Boy, you just convinced me.
I mean, don't you think people almost, that's sure. Something that's another belief.
It's a great rationale not to do it. Yeah. Sure. Yeah. What a tragedy.
Yeah, I'd rather keep my eyes closed and be content than know what's possible. Yeah. Like you were saying before, I think last week, I'm not going to go out shopping if I can't buy something that I can't afford.
Right. Just frustrate me.
I don't want to be frustrated, so I'd rather not know that I could actually have that $75,000 a year job instead of the $30,000 a year job I have now.
I think that's another thing to consider too. I think a lot of people, once they get caught up in some of these ideas and concepts, become illusionary and they take off too big a chunk. You know, they get frustrated if they can't do this. They can't, therefore they revert back to where they were and even regress some.
So maybe they should just start out smaller?
Small. You've got to be careful. There's a rising level of expectations in the mind as dominated by the Icarus complex. Remember Icarus? Mm-hmm. We have to be careful. Like, for example, there's some evidence that most people really can't handle more than 50% of what they're already earning without panicking. And I've seen that happen a lot, too, where things begin to flow for somebody and they really become panicked about it and do everything they can to stop it. Fairly understandable in a way when you think about it. But say, for example, if a person's making $50,000 a year, to start talking to them about making 100 or 150, you're probably going to shut down.
55 or 60, maybe 75.
Yeah, maybe half again as much. They could probably handle 75, you know, if you can show them how that might be done in some reasonable amount of time and reasonable amount of effort. But most people are not prepared to, quote, sacrifice everything in order to accomplish that. Or they might initially, but when they begin to realize the price they're going to have to pay, and then they begin to shame the dream. You know, they say, oh, well, that really wasn't for me, and that's kind of tragic. But I would think that to be able to begin to make those adjustments and to be able to set those sights, some people call it setting a goal, you know, but I think really it's a matter of making adjustments, finding a purpose, why you really should do this, what makes it worthwhile. That establishes some parameters, remember that process, to define some pursuits. What is it you're really going after? And have the willingness to know that if you're pursuing something, you may have to speed up, stop and rest, change direction, get some more information, develop some more skills. But the fact is that it's capturable. You can actually have that thing so long as it's not illusionary. Well, you know, if it's within your realm of reason, you know.
I heard something one time that I thought was very interesting, and it stuck in my mind, although for a long time I wasn't sure what to do with it. But I think I'm beginning to understand a little more. The fellow said, before I could be successful, I had to realize what I was not willing to change in my life. And once I realized what I was not willing to change, then I could look at what I was willing to do differently, what I felt comfortable enough, or I felt like I could manage, or I could handle that. And he said, once I was able to say, yes, I'm willing to do that, then I began the process. And of course, as he started to do a few things, he would reevaluate almost without thinking. Say, well, you know, if I could do that, then I can do this too.
I've had an interview process that I've used for some years now if I'm interviewing someone for staff or whatever, and I really recommend this too, is to start the interview, of course, with a name and a phone number, maybe a social security number and stuff, and then say, okay, let's look at the rewards of what we're talking about. And I would say, what's the least amount of money that you will accept in this process, providing you know that there's a great deal more waiting for you once you develop the skills. Because what's the least amount? And a person might say, well, I'd have to have at least $20,000. I'd say, okay. What amount then would make you happy? Would it be pleasing as opposed to being ecstatic? We want 3 figures altogether. You know, acceptable, pleasant, happy, you know what I mean? And then, wow. You call home to mother and say, guess what happened to me? And so I'd get maybe 20 and 30 and say 40,000,
Yeah.
okay? And I'd say, okay, now for this $30,000 figure, okay, what I'd like to find out is what you don't want to do in order to earn that kind of money. What don't you want to do? And it's kind of fascinating. About the only thing that ever comes up is lie, steal, cheat, and what have you. You know what I mean? Because if indeed they haven't been making that, they can't think of things they don't want to do. I mean, it's really fascinating. And so I say, okay, now let's look at the things that we have to do to see which column you want to put them in. Okay, and then I start enumerating the tasks of the business, okay? And people say, no, I can do that, I can do that, I can do that. And so what I'm doing is eliciting, if you would, maybe 20 or 30 commitments from them that they will do this in order to have that. And indeed, if they do, they will. You know how that goes. But it's always amazing to me because the mind just normally doesn't think that way. What do you not want to do in order to earn that kind of money? Now, once in a while, they'll say, well, I don't want to dig ditches, or I don't want to, you know, I don't want to travel. And I'd say, okay, I understand that. But not always. Not always. Usually that's like, gee, I'll do anything for that, especially if I know what. Then I'm leading myself to making a great deal more. So we'll just have to, I don't know, just got to, did you get a signal? Yeah, here we go. Mike, is that on up? I don't know where we are time-wise. I don't have my clock and I can't see our watch. I'm going to say this. This is Life Living and Making a Living, called Life Talk. And do you have anything at all that you want to add to for these people before I say goodnight?
Well, I'd like to challenge them, anyone who's watched the show tonight, that they, at the conclusion of this show, while the thoughts are still in their mind, they just grab a piece of paper and write down something that they want in their life, a little thing that they would like to have, and see what they're willing to do to change. Something small,
okay,
what they're willing to do to change.
And then call 1-800-661-3490 and let us know what it is, and maybe we can start coaching and mentoring and assisting them in acquiring it, because that's what we do.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's about forward movement. And so it's Life Talk, and my name is